Lena and Daniel were ecstatic. They had found the perfect apartment.
It was nestled on Harbinger Lane, a quaint, tree-lined street. The old building had character with its high ceilings and creaking floorboards. Lena pictured their life there, filled with laughter and warmth. Daniel smiled, caught up in her infectious enthusiasm. They moved their belongings in, eager to start this new chapter. The first few days were blissful. They unpacked boxes, arranged furniture, and made the space their own. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Lena hung their favorite painting on the living room wall. It depicted a peaceful meadow, a stark contrast to the bustling city outside. Everything felt full of promise.
As evening descended, a subtle shift occurred. Shadows lengthened, creeping across the walls like silent invaders. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy.
Lena noticed at first a prickle on the back of her neck, an unsettling feeling she couldn't quite place. She dismissed it as fatigue from the move, but the feeling lingered. The unsettling events began subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. A book misplaced, a glass shattering in the dead of night. These were small incidents, easily dismissed as coincidences. Lena brushed it off as accidents, but Daniel couldn't shake off the feeling that something was amiss. He felt a growing unease, a sense that they were not alone. He would wake in the night, heart pounding, to the sound of whispers. They were faint, almost like a breeze, but unmistakably there. They seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, too low to decipher, yet undeniably present. It was as if the house itself was trying to communicate.
One evening, as Lena hummed while preparing dinner, the lights flickered. She paused, glancing around the room. The room plunged into darkness, enveloping her in an eerie silence. She froze, a shiver running down her spine. The darkness felt oppressive, almost tangible.
Daniel rushed to check the fuse box but found nothing amiss. The circuits were intact, and there was no apparent reason for the outage. When the lights flickered back on, Lena noticed a vase had moved. It was a small detail, but it sent a chill down her spine. It now sat precariously on the edge of the shelf as if placed there deliberately. The thought that someone or something had moved it was unsettling.
Daniel tried to rationalize the events. He told himself that old buildings had their quirks. Drafts, faulty wiring, and settling foundations could explain the strange occurrences. But the whispers, the feeling of being watched, were harder to dismiss. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. He couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread that seemed to permeate the house. He found himself researching the history of the building, scouring old newspapers and city archives. He needed answers, something to explain the inexplicable. He discovered whispers and rumors, stories of previous tenants who had fled, driven out by unexplained occurrences. The more he read, the more he realized they were not the first to experience these events. Stories of previous tenants who had fled, driven out by unexplained occurrences. The accounts were eerily similar to what they were experiencing now. It was as if the house had a dark history, one that repeated itself with each new occupant. Lena and Daniel knew they had to confront whatever was haunting their home. They couldn't continue living in fear, constantly looking over their shoulders. Together, they decided to face the unknown, to uncover the secrets hidden within the walls. It was a journey that would test their courage and their bond, but they were determined to find the truth. The whispers in the walls were just the beginning. What lay ahead was a mystery that would change their lives forever. The more Daniel learned, the more his unease grew. The building had a troubled past, shrouded in mystery. There were whispers of a family that had met a tragic end within its walls, their spirits forever bound to the place. He discovered an old newspaper clipping, detailing a fire that had ravaged the building decades ago. The article mentioned an unidentified woman, trapped inside, her cries for help echoing through the night.
Daniel kept his findings from Lena. He didn't want to alarm her, but he couldn't ignore the growing sense of dread that clung to him. He started seeing things in the periphery of his vision. Shadows moving just a little too quickly, fleeting glimpses of figures lurking in the corners of his eyes. He felt a constant pressure, a presence bearing down on him, watching his every move.
The whispers in the walls grew louder, more insistent. They seemed to taunt him, to mock his disbelief. He started sleeping less, his mind racing, haunted by the unseen. He felt himself slipping, his grip on reality slowly unraveling. Section 4. The Trance. One night, Daniel woke with a jolt. His heart was racing and his breath came in short, sharp gasps. The room was cloaked in darkness, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioner. He felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if something terrible was about to happen.
His body was slick with sweat, his heart pounding in his chest. He could feel the cold sweat trickling down his back, soaking his shirt. His hands trembled as he clutched his chest, trying to calm the frantic beating of his heart. The fear was palpable, a living, breathing entity that seemed to wrap itself around him, squeezing the air from his lungs. He was in bed, but he felt strangely detached, as if he were floating above himself. It was an eerie sensation, as though his spirit had left his body and was now hovering above, looking down at the scene below. He could see himself lying there, eyes wide with terror, yet he felt no connection to the physical form that was his own.
He looked over to see Lena sleeping peacefully beside him, oblivious to his terror. Her face was serene, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within him. He wanted to reach out, to shake her awake, to tell her about the nightmare that had gripped him, but he couldn't move. He was paralyzed, trapped in his own fear. He tried to speak, but no words came out. He was trapped, his voice stolen by some unseen force. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. It was as if his vocal cords had been severed, leaving him mute and helpless. The silence was deafening, a void that seemed to swallow him whole.
He stumbled out of bed and walked to the living room. His legs felt like lead, each step a monumental effort. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, the shadows dancing on the walls, mocking his fear. He could hear the faint creak of the floorboards beneath his feet, a reminder of the reality he was trying to escape. He felt drawn there, compelled by an unknown force. It was as if an invisible hand was guiding him, pulling him towards the living room. He didn't know why, but he couldn't resist. The compulsion was too strong, an irresistible pull that he couldn't fight.
As he stood in the center of the room, he felt a cold hand grip his shoulder. The touch was icy, sending a shiver down his spine. He spun around, his heart pounding in his chest, but there was no one there. He was alone, yet he felt surrounded, suffocated by a presence he couldn't see but could feel with every fiber of his being. He spun around, but there was no one there. He was alone, yet he felt surrounded, suffocated by a presence he couldn't see but could feel with every fiber of his being. The air was thick with tension, a palpable sense of dread that seemed to press down on him from all sides. He could feel the eyes of the unseen presence watching him, studying him, waiting for the right moment to strike.
His vision blurred and the room began to spin. He stumbled, collapsing to his knees. The world around him seemed to dissolve into a swirling vortex of shadows and light. He could feel the ground slipping away beneath him, as if he were being pulled into a bottomless abyss. His mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion, unable to grasp the reality of what was happening. As his consciousness faded, he felt a sense of displacement, as if he were being transported somewhere else, beyond the confines of the apartment walls. It was a strange, disorienting sensation, as though he were being pulled through a tunnel of darkness, the world around him fading into nothingness. He could feel himself slipping away, his grip on reality loosening with each passing second.
He was no longer in control, his body and mind at the mercy of the unseen guest that had taken up residence in their home. The presence was all-encompassing, a dark force that seemed to seep into every corner of his being. He could feel it probing his thoughts, invading his mind, twisting his perceptions. He was a prisoner in his own body, a puppet to the whims of the unseen entity that had claimed him. The terror was overwhelming, a suffocating blanket of fear that left him gasping for breath. He knew that whatever this presence was, it was not of this world, and it had no intention of letting him go. Section 5. A respite from the shadows. Lena found Daniel the next morning, slumped on the living room floor. His body was limp, and his face was etched with an expression of deep distress. He was pale and disoriented, his eyes vacant and distant. It was as if he had been drained of all vitality, leaving behind a shell of the man he once was.
She rushed to his side, her worry overriding the unease that had been steadily growing within her. She called his name, her voice trembling with fear, but he did not respond. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and for the first time, Lena felt a flicker of fear. The kind of fear that gnaws at the edges of your sanity, whispering that something unseen and malevolent is at play.
She convinced Daniel they needed a break. They packed a small bag, leaving most of their belongings untouched. The decision was made in haste, driven by an instinctual need to escape the oppressive atmosphere that had taken hold of their home. The apartment felt suffocating, the air heavy with unseen menace. Every corner seemed to harbor shadows that whispered of dread and despair.
As they drove away, Lena glanced back at the building. It loomed over the street, its windows dark and vacant, like the eyes of a predator. She shivered, feeling as though the building itself was watching them leave, its presence a lingering threat.
They rented a small cottage by the sea, hoping the salt air and the sound of crashing waves would wash away the unsettling memories of Harbinger Lane. The cottage was quaint and peaceful, a stark contrast to the dark, oppressive apartment they had left behind. For a while it seemed to work. Daniel's color returned, his eyes regaining their focus. He smiled more, and the tension that had gripped him seemed to ease.
He spoke of the event sparingly, attributing his trance-like state to stress and exhaustion. He tried to rationalize the inexplicable, convincing himself and Lena that it was all just a result of overwork and lack of sleep.
Lena wanted to believe him, but she couldn't shake off the feeling that they were running from something they couldn't outrun. The shadows of Harbinger Lane seemed to follow them, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to reclaim their hold. The seaside cottage offered a temporary respite, but deep down, Lena knew that the true battle was far from over. The darkness they had fled from was not confined to the walls of their apartment. It was a part of them now, a shadow that would follow them wherever they went.